Consider the FDA, which I think brings out the case much better, the Food and Drug Administration. Originally arose out of the reaction to the Upton-Sinclair jungle kind of exposure, but more recently has been moving more and more in the direction of drugs as opposed to foods. Now, you put yourself in the position of an FDA bureaucrat considering whether to approve, let's take the simplest case, whether to approve a proposed new drug. There are two kinds of mistakes you can make from the point of view of the public interest. You can make the mistake of approving a drug that turns out to have very harmful side effects. That's one mistake. That will harm the public. Or you can make the mistake of not approving a drug which would have very beneficial effects. That's also harmful to the public. If you're such a bureaucrat, what's going to be the effect on you of those two mistakes? If you make a mistake and approve a product that has harmful side effects, you are a devil incarnate. Your misdeed will be spread on the front page of every newspaper. Your name will be mud. You will get the blame. If you fail to approve a drug which might save lives, the people who would object to that are mostly going to be dead. You're not going to hear from them. It's more extreme. It's more serious. Because suppose you fail to approve a drug which isn't so dramatic that it would actually save lives, but would just improve the comfort of everybody. Suppose in the 1890s there had been a present FDA and aspirin had been offered to it as a drug. It would never have been approved. Now, aspirin may not save very many lives, but it certainly has produced a tremendous improvement in human comfort over the decades. But that improvement, nobody would know it had been denied them. That's really the point with which I started when I came in here about the policy of rationing as opposed to a price mechanism. The people who are outside. The bureaucrat who turns down what ultimately would turn out to be a good drug, not many people are going to complain about that. Now, there will be some. The people who develop the drug will complain about it. But then you can dismiss those. They are special pleaders. They're just trying to pursue their own narrow, greedy self-interest at the expense of the innocent, gullible public. There will be some physicians, perhaps, who have been involved in it. A few patients who have tried it on an experimental basis. If you have the present situation of different standards in different countries, there will be some feedback from abroad. There will be people who have gone abroad and heard about this, so there will be some objections. But I think you will agree with me that as a bureaucrat, your self-interest lies in taking all kinds of chances of failing to approve a good drug in order to reduce the chance that you will approve a bad drug. And consequently, the net effect of the self-interest of the bureaucrat, and I'm not questioning motives. I'm not saying they're bad people. They're not. They're perfectly good people. Their intentions are fine. They're you and me. If any one of us were in that position, if any one of us took a job, I might go on and say that those of us who didn't take that attitude wouldn't hold those jobs very long. There's a selective process. Evolution works in every area. It doesn't only work in monkeys. It doesn't only work in social in physical characteristics. It also works in social institutions. And those bureaucrats who gave a proper balance to approval on the one hand and disapproval on the other would not have a long life in governmental bureaus. They would be pilloried, and they would be kicked out. And so those bureaucrats who survive will only be able to survive if they follow a policy that is very harmful to the consumer. The results are very predictable for the reasons I've given. The results are that you will have an excess of prevention of good drugs in order to avoid excess of prohibition of good drugs, in order to avoid admitting a few bad ones, that you will increase the costs of doing medical research, that you will reduce the amount of medical research done, that you will reduce the battery of drugs available to the public. And these effects have clearly been manifest. It has become much more expensive to meet FDA standards since the 1962 Kefauver amendments, which greatly strengthened the requirements imposed on the FDA, requiring them to judge not only the safety but also the efficacy of new drugs. There have been any number of studies, Sam Peltzman's path-breaking and brilliant study of the costs versus the benefits of regulation, in which he establishes a tremendous excess of the costs of the FDA regulation over the benefit. The work of some of the people at the Rochester Center, Dr. Wardwell, Dr. Lasagna, who have compared and listed the drugs that are available abroad and those that are available here. The number of new drugs that are admitted each year, which has been cut in half in the United States. The increasing tendency for companies in the United States to do their research abroad in order to get away from the requirements at home. And you can go on and on. The effects have been disastrous, in my opinion, in this respect. Now, the question one wants to ask is, who benefits from such regulation? We've seen that if you have things like ICC, FDA, CAB, SEC, FPA, et cetera, we've seen that the consumer is hurt. Who benefits? The obvious beneficiaries are, of course, first, the do-good reformers who get these measures across. They benefit, the Ralph Naders and his group benefit because they get publicity, they get, and if, no, let me not put it that way. Let's assume they're perfectly sincere. They get the achievement of their objectives. They get what they're looking for. The bureaucrats who get hired benefit. Again, one of the most rapidly expanding areas of employment is employment within these regulatory agencies. I have to confess that in part I'm talking against my professional interests. The thing that has kept the market for economists high ever since the New Deal days, that has meant that in the recent years when the demand for most other professions have gone down, the demand for economists has stayed high. The thing that has kept the demand for economists high has been increasing government regulation. Indeed, lawyers and economists are about the only two groups in the community who are in a very good position to make sure that the demand keeps up with the supply. So the group of people who are hired and take jobs in these areas benefit. What about industry? Does it benefit or is it hurt? And the answer here is not easy to give. In general, with respect to industry or business, there are conflicting effects. Some in the direction of favoring the industry or the business, some in the effect of hurting the industry or the business. For example, take the case of the drug industry and take the case of FDA, and what about the pharmaceutical companies? Well, on the one hand, they are hurt by the fact that it becomes more expensive and more difficult to conduct research into new products, more costly to introduce them, takes a longer period of time. The drug lag, as you probably all know, has more than doubled since the 1962 Kefauver amendments. It is a lag between proposing a drug for approval and the final approval of that small fraction which are finally approved. In the case of those that are disapproved, the lag has become infinite. In those respects, the pharmaceutical companies are harmed. On the other hand, they are also benefiting because they, like the railroads, are to some extent protected from competition. If it takes company A a long time and is very expensive to introduce a new product, it also takes company B a long time, and it's very expensive for company B. So that company B benefits, company B at that stage loses and company A benefits. A case that happens to interest me personally, because it happens to be tied in with some problems that my wife has had in one of her eyes, is the soft lens case. The contact lens that Bausch & Lomb introduced is a soft lens. Now, it took Bausch & Lomb a long time to get approval for that from FDA, and they spent I don't know how many tens of millions of dollars in order to get approval. I may say it's unclear that it should ever have been under the authority of FDA. FDA had never exercised authority over eyeglasses, but they decided to exercise authority over the soft contact lenses. They had never exercised authority before that over the hard contact lenses. But of course you realize that's another common characteristic of the bureaucrat. You want to extend your control as much as you can. That's the way to get influence. That's the way to get a larger staff. That's the way to be more important. So, of course, every bureaucrat in his own self-interest will tend to find that his power covers any questionable area. But let me go back. Bausch & Lomb spent a lot of money in getting the soft lens approved. But once it was approved, they had a free play, they had a free field for something like 3 or 4 years. Only just now are other soft lenses coming and being approved. And you can understand why that is. If FDA made Bausch & Lomb take 3 or 4 years to get approval, it's only fair that they should impose the same costs on everybody else. Equality above everything. The result of that is that Bausch & Lomb is sort of a standoff. And in general, when Professor Sam Peltzman, who made the study I was talking about earlier about the effect of the Kefauver amendments in the drug area, went to investigate the effect on the profits of pharmaceutical companies, he came out with the conclusion that it was roughly a standoff, that on the average they had neither benefited nor lost from it. Well, that may be true or may not be. I'm sure some companies benefited and some lost, and much depended on the character of the company. In the short run, it may be a trade-off. But in the long run, over a longer period of time, I have no doubt that the industry loses because it ceases to be a private industry sooner or later. If you take the railroads, again, the history over 100 years of the railroads is an excellent example of what is the natural course of governmental regulation and governmental policy. It inevitably goes from regulation to subsidization to ultimate takeover. And if that took 100 years, or 90 years really, for railroads, you know, there's technological improvement in all respects.